"Your mum's cute," his fiancée said, loud enough that the investor standing 2 feet away could hear. "Very. Grassroots." My son laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A comfortable one, the kind you produce when someone says exactly what you were thinking, but wouldn't say yourself. I was holding a cream-colored envelope. I'd been holding it all evening, working up the nerve to give it to him at the right moment. Inside was a single document, folded in thirds the way I always fold important papers. 36 years of night shifts at St. Michael's Hospital had taught me to keep things tidy, even the things that mattered most. Mum. My son took the envelope without quite looking at me. He glanced at the first page, maybe 3 seconds, then handed it to his fiancée the way you hand someone a coat check ticket. "We'll look at this later, yeah? Tonight's a big night." She smiled and slipped the envelope into her clutch without opening it further. "So thoughtful," she said. And then she turned back to the investor. My son turned with her, and just like that, I was standing in the middle of an $800 a head catering event without anyone to talk to. The tech incubator on King Street West had been refurbished beautifully. Exposed brick, Edison bulbs, a bar serving craft cocktails with the company logo on the napkins. The kind of space young entrepreneurs rented when they wanted to look like they'd already made it. 200 people, all of them dressed in the language of casual success. I was wearing a navy blouse from the Bay. I'd ironed it 3 times. "She's very sweet," I heard his fiancée telling someone near the bar. His mum. "She took the GO train in from Scarborough. You know how it is." You know how it is. The way she said it, you would have thought she was describing someone's rescue dog. I found my coat on the rack near the entrance, put it on slowly, 1 button at a time. My son was already laughing at something across the room, completely at ease. He didn't see me leave. The wind off Lake Ontario hit me the moment I stepped onto King Street. January in Toronto, sharp enough to cut. I walked to the bus stop, sat down, and waited. I didn't cry. I've never been much for crying in public. 36 years as a registered nurse will cure you of that. But I sat in the cold, and I thought about that document in her clutch. I thought about everything it represented, and I thought, not yet, but soon. The next morning, I made a pot of Earl Grey and sat at my kitchen table in Scarborough. The apartment was the same one I'd moved into in 1992. A 2-bedroom on Lawrence Avenue, nothing fancy, good light in the mornings and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. My son had, on 3 separate occasions, told people I was a building superintendent. I am not a building superintendent. I am the person who owns the building. Let me explain. In 1991, I was 32 years old, working nights at the hospital, taking home just under $38,000 a year after taxes. Divorced, raising my son alone, paying for daycare, groceries, and a secondhand Civic that needed a new alternator every 18 months. I wasn't supposed to have money. The math didn't suggest it. But I'd grown up watching my father sit at the kitchen table every Saturday with the newspaper, circling properties for sale. He never bought any. He called it a dream. I decided it didn't have to be. In 1991, a semi-detached in Hamilton came up. $87,500, owner motivated to sell, minor water damage in the basement. Everyone I knew told me not to do it. Too far, too much work, too risky on a nurse's salary. I bought it anyway. I fixed the basement myself, mostly from library books and the patience of a retired plumber, who lived across the street and felt sorry for me in a way that turned out to be useful. I rented both units. The rent covered the mortgage. 4 years later, I bought the unit next door. I told no one, not because I was ashamed, because I had learned something early. When you are a woman who works nights in a uniform, people do not expect you to understand money. If I had talked about what I was building, someone would have talked me out of it, the way they talk everyone out of things that seem too far beyond what's expected of them. Over 3 decades, I kept buying. Small properties in Hamilton, Brantford, a couple in Kitchener when the market was still reasonable. I incorporated a numbered company in 2003. Ontario holding structure, nothing complicated. My son never asked about it. He never asked about most things that didn't immediately concern him. By January of last year, the numbered company held 18 properties, combined market value, $8.4 million. My RRSP and non-registered accounts, dividend stocks and GICs I'd been rolling over quietly since the late 90s, held another $1.2 million. Just under $10 million in total. My son didn't know. The tech incubator on King Street, the one where 200 people had drunk craft cocktails at his launch party, I'd purchased in 2017 for $1.95 million. It had been a failing print shop before that, the kind of place that couldn't survive the digital age. I'd seen what it could become. I gutted the interior, brought in a contractor, opened it as a commercial rental space for small businesses. My son had signed a 5-year commercial lease on the 3rd floor 18 months ago. He'd written a check to 0734 Ontario Limited every month and never thought twice about it. He'd never asked who his landlord was. He'd never thought to look. Why would a building superintendent's son bother checking? Have you ever been dismissed by someone who didn't know what they were walking away from? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. My tea went cold while I was sitting there. I made a fresh cup and called my property manager, Elaine. "Morning," she said. "How'd the event go?" "Fine. Elaine, I need you to pull the lease file on Unit 3C, the tech company. Call me if anyone from that unit contacts you about anything other than routine maintenance." "Sure thing." A pause. "Everything okay?" "It will be." I hung up and opened the filing cabinet under the window, the one that looks like an ordinary 2-drawer cabinet from Canadian Tire, with the combination lock I've had since 1998. Inside, 18 property files, color-coded by city, RRSP statements, brokerage account records, and at the back a letter I'd received from my solicitor 3 weeks earlier. He'd flagged an anomaly. A transfer document had arrived at his office, a form attempting to move one of my Hamilton properties, bearing what appeared to be my signature. Except I hadn't signed it. I hadn't been anywhere near his office on the date stamped on the form. I'd been in Scarborough, watching a hockey game and eating leftover shepherd's pie. My solicitor had caught it because he'd known my signature for 22 years. He'd said, "This is title fraud. We need to report it." I'd said, "Give me a week." The document listed a transfer into a numbered company I'd never heard of. I'd asked my accountant to trace the beneficial ownership. It took her 4 days. The company traced back to my son's fiancée. I'll sit with that for a moment, because even now it takes a breath to say clearly. The woman my son was about to marry, who called me very grassroots, at an evening I'd ironed my blouse 3 times for, had attempted to transfer a property I owned into a company she controlled. She'd forged my signature to do it. She'd been in my son's life for 3 years. She'd met me twice, at Christmas dinners, where she spent most of the evening on her phone. She'd smiled when my son said I was a building superintendent. And in the 6 weeks before the launch event, she'd tried to steal from me. I hired a private investigator. His name was Rex. Former OPP, ran a small firm out of Etobicoke, had a handshake like a man who still split his own firewood. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. "You want to know what else she's been doing," he said. It wasn't a question. "I want to know everything." He called me 9 days later. We met at a Tim Hortons on Dundas, his large black coffee, my medium with 1 milk, and he opened a manila folder on the table between us. "3 things," he said. "First, the title fraud attempt. You already know about that. The filing was caught before it cleared, but the attempt is documented. Second, she's been running up credit in your son's name. Co-signed a personal line of credit for a $180,000. He signed the documents, but the money moved into her accounts, not the business." I kept my face still. I learned that in nursing. Keep your face still when you hear something bad. Someone is always watching. Third, Rex put a photograph on the table, a screenshot of a text message. She's been in contact with a commercial real estate agent, looking to list a property in Hamilton. The address matches one of yours. The same property she'd tried to transfer. I looked out the window at the parking lot. A woman in a parka was loading a toddler into a minivan. The toddler kept dropping a mittened hand, laughing each time. Who do I call about the title fraud? I asked. Starts with the OPP fraud unit. Could involve the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services if it escalates. He wrote a name on the back of his card. I can make the introduction. I left 20 minutes later. The folder was in my bag. The January air smelled like metal. I thought about calling my son on the walk to the bus stop. I didn't. He'd been calling me for 11 days by that point. 17 voicemails. The first few were light. Hey, Mum. Haven't heard from you. Hope you're good. By the 5th, the tone had shifted. By the 9th, he was asking if he'd done something wrong. By the 12th, he'd stopped pretending not to know. I listened to all 17 on a Saturday morning with my second cup of tea. Then I put the phone face down on the kitchen table and went to work on my crossword. He needed to keep calling for a while longer. Still here? Drop a comment so I know. And if any part of this has ever happened to you, being dismissed by someone who didn't understand what they were standing next to, I want to hear it. 14 days after meeting Rex, I called my solicitor and told him to proceed with the fraud report. Then I called Elaine. I need you to arrange access to the King Street building. Next Thursday, 2 p.m. Tell whoever asks that the property owner is doing a walkthrough. Should I mention who the property owner is? No, just say the owner. Ontario property records are public. Anyone who'd run a proper title search before signing a commercial lease would have found the numbered company and could have traced beneficial ownership through the provincial corporate registry. It wasn't hidden. My son had simply never looked. He'd never thought his landlord was worth investigating. Thursday came with a gray sky and the smell of snow that hadn't decided to fall yet. I arrived at 1:55. Elaine met me at the entrance, professional as always, giving nothing away. That's why she'd worked for me for 7 years. At 2:10, my son's car pulled up. He got out looking tired in a way that good suits can't fix. His fiancée was with him. Heels too sharp for January ice, a wool coat that cost more than my first Civic. He saw me before he reached the door, stopped. Mum, his voice was careful. What are you doing here? I called this meeting. He looked at Elaine. She held her clipboard and said nothing. This is my building, I said. Elaine manages it for me. Unit 3C, 3rd floor, your lease. The silence after that sentence was specific and complete. The kind that happens when a room reorganizes itself around a fact it wasn't expecting. Your building, he said slowly. Yes. His fiancée's expression shifted. Not shock, calculation. I could see her working through it. How much does she know? What can be explained? How quickly can this be managed? I used her name then. I'd been calling her my son's fiancée inside my head for 3 years. It felt important to be precise now. Anika. I looked at her directly. On November 14th, a transfer document arrived at my solicitor's office bearing what appeared to be my signature. It attempted to transfer a property on Aberdeen Avenue in Hamilton into a numbered company registered in your name. My son turned to look at her slowly. The way you turn when you don't want to see what you're about to see. There's been a misunderstanding with some paperwork, she said. Her voice stayed even. I'll give her that. My solicitor has known my signature for 22 years. He flagged it before it cleared. I kept my voice level, the same way I used to deliver difficult news to families in the hospital. Clear, steady, without cruelty. He also noted a $180,000 personal credit line opened in my son's name, with the funds moved into an account you control, and a communication with a real estate agent about listing the same Hamilton property. The silence this time was different, heavier. "This is absurd." She took a step back. "You're twisting things. You don't understand how business." "I've been buying and managing real estate in this province for 32 years, I said. "I understand how it works." My son was still looking at his fiancée. I watched him watching her. I watched her watch him back, and I saw the exact moment he understood that she was calculating rather than denying. That's the thing about people who are always managing a situation. When they stop having a good answer, you can see the machinery. "The fraud report has been filed with the OPP, I said. "Whatever you need to discuss with each other, I'd suggest you do it with separate legal counsel." She picked up her bag, looked at my son. He looked at the floor. She left. Her heels made quick, precise sounds on the concrete walkway, and then they didn't. My son stood in the entrance of a building he hadn't known, his mother owned, and looked like someone who'd been handed a map of a country he'd never heard of. "How much?" he asked finally. "The building, about $2.4 million. The full portfolio, just under $10 million. He closed his eyes. "You're a nurse," he said, almost to himself. "Was a nurse, 36 years. The money came from the properties. It started with a duplex in Hamilton when you were 2 years old." He sat down on the front step of the building. In January, coat still on. Elbows on his knees, head in his hands, and he looked for the first time in a long time, like the boy who used to help me carry groceries up 4 flights of stairs in the old apartment on Pharmacy Avenue. I sat down beside him. The step was cold. "The envelope," he said after a moment, "at the launch. What was in it?" "The deed," I said, "to this building. I was going to give it to you, as a gift." He went very still. "I was going to give you the building." "I know." A long pause. When he lifted his head, his expression didn't have a clean name. Somewhere between grief and the first breath of something better. I didn't hug him. He hadn't earned that back yet. But I stayed beside him on the cold step while the city moved around us, and after a while we stopped talking and just sat there, and that felt like as honest a thing as either of us had managed in years. The OPP investigation took 4 months. I won't detail all of it. What I can say is that the title fraud charge stood, and that the financial irregularities my son found in his business accounts, once he actually looked, confirmed everything Rex had laid out over black coffee that January morning. He called me often during those months. I didn't always answer. Not out of anger, but because he needed to sit with what he was learning. Some understanding can't be borrowed. It has to be lived through. He came to the apartment one Sunday in March, took the GO train, sat at my kitchen table and drank tea he didn't really want. He said, "I spent 3 years letting her define what was worth respecting. I thought I was building something real. I was curating an image. You were actually building something real and I couldn't see it." I said, "Now you can." That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is slower than that, and it starts with the person who caused the harm. But it was honest. And honest is a better starting place than most. The King Street building is undergoing a partial conversion. The 3rd floor will become a community mental health drop-in center, operating in partnership with the local CMHA chapter, sliding scale counseling, peer support groups, safe hours for people who have nowhere else to be on a Tuesday afternoon. The ground floor stays commercial. It pays for the renovation. Elaine sends me Friday updates. The space will be ready by May. There is a waiting list. I stood in front of the building last week on an afternoon when the light had finally started to feel like spring. The construction sign in the window reads, "Coming soon, Community Mental Health Drop-In Center." Below that, in smaller letters, "This space exists because of the people who built quietly, when no one was watching." I wrote that line myself. My son called while I was standing there. I answered on the 2nd ring. "You at the building?" he asked. "I am." Looks good, the sign. It does. A pause. Not uncomfortable anymore. The kind that feels like something's settling rather than something broken. "Mom," he said, "I'm sorry." "I know. I'm going to keep being sorry for a while." "I know that too." I put my hand in my coat pocket. The wind smelled like cold lake water and the beginning of something different. "Come for dinner Sunday. I'm making shepherd's pie." A breath. "Yeah, okay." Good. I hung up and looked at the building one more time. 12 meters of brick on King Street West. Edison bulbs still in the windows from the launch party that felt like a different year. People sometimes ask me why I didn't show my son what I'd built before it reached that point. Why I let things go so far before saying anything. I've thought about it. I don't have a simple answer. I believed for too long that love was supposed to be unconditional in a way that didn't require explanation. That my son would understand the value of quiet work without needing me to prove it. I was wrong. Understanding needs to be taught. I should have taught him earlier, with more words and less silence. Don't do what I did. If you've built something, a savings account, a garden, a life that looks small from the outside and is enormous from the inside, say so. Not to prove your worth. Because the people you love deserve to know who you are before a crisis forces the introduction. I still live in the apartment on Lawrence. I could live anywhere. I've thought about it. But this is where I made my first budget in 1991, sat at this same table, and decided that what I earned would become more than what I needed. I don't want to forget how that felt. It was not a small thing to believe in what you were building when no one else could see it yet. Last Thursday, I opened the filing cabinet and took out the folder with my son's name on it. I've been adding to it for 30 years, report cards, a newspaper clipping from when he won a science fair, a photo from his university graduation where I'm standing beside him, grinning like I could barely contain it. I added one more thing this week. A copy of the community center agreement. His name is on the advisory committee. He asked to be involved. He's been showing up every Wednesday evening for the planning meetings without being asked twice. He doesn't know I kept the folder. But he would recognize the handwriting on the tab. I raised him after all, and I always kept the receipts.